line, we've got Kovini Moodley, who's a chartered accountant, government risk and compliance specialist, and a founder of Boss Babes of South Africa. I think that's my name. As South Africa marks Workers' Day on the 1st of May, a town leader in the fight for fair labor practices and human dignity, an important conversation is taking center stage on that challenges us to look beyond the history we celebrated and confront the realities many workers face today. A new call is being made for dignity, equality, and lawfulness to become a lived experience in every workplace, not just ideals on paper. At the heart of this conversation is Kovini Moodley, a chartered accountant and governance risk and compliance expert, who is raising critical concerns about workplace bullying, harassment, and the gap between legislation and real-world implementation. She argues that for many South Africans, especially women, the workplace remains a place where dignity is still negotiated rather than guaranteed. So true. A very good morning to you, Kovini.
Good morning, Faith. Thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you so much for joining us. Important conversation we are having today. I just want to dive into the issue of Workers' Day, which is often about history. Why do you feel that it is important to focus on current workplace realities this year?
I think because there's a lot of things that unfortunately go swept under the cover. And
Yeah.
from a risk and a governance perspective, I've been doing this for more than 18 years now. I think it's really important for companies to identify these type of risks, mitigate it, and put in place effective controls to make sure that certain problems within workplaces do not recur. And the problems that I'm speaking about today are really focused on following on from Freedom Day, following on from Workers' Day, where we're taking days to celebrate the great strides that we've made as South Africans. But at the same time, I think it's important to just raise the fact that something called corporate GBV, which encompasses harassment, sexual harassment, bullying within workplaces, is something that unfortunately is still very rife within workplaces.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, you describe this as a national call.
Yes.
What makes the situation urgent right now?
You see, for me, I have a pretty large or significant LinkedIn presence, as well as my platform, Boss Babes of South Africa, and I mentor a lot of young women as well. And this theme of, being harassed, being bullied by someone in power is seeming to be coming through a lot more these days. I'm also part of various forums and discussions that I get called into, and it feels that when people are given the opportunity to speak, this seems to be something that is almost, as I call it, a silent pandemic in South Africa.
Yeah. What does it mean when you say, dignity is so negotiated and not guaranteed in the workplace?
I think often, workspaces in general have great policies. I can't really fault policies, but it is in the implementation of those policies that sometimes, very disparate decisions are made from a policy to what actually happens within a workplace. And matters that involve harassment often need to be, considered with a lot of sensitivity, with a lot of protection, with the form of employer's duty of care when someone raises a harassment issue. And just on my own experience and the individuals that I mentor and the forums that I'm part of, it doesn't seem like this is something that a lot of employer groups are taking seriously. Often when someone chooses to speak up, you find that there's a series of retaliative behaviors and eventually aiming to push that person out of an organization, which for me is actually, not aligned with law, not aligned with the code of good practice in South Africa. Those are all legal legislations that every company, public or private, needs to be aligning themselves with.
Yeah. Now, from your experience, where bullying and harassment is quite a thing currently across industries, in terms of percentage-wise, how would you say these are still in place within different industries?
Look, I've been quite, I want to say, diverse in my own industry. I haven't experienced it a lot. because thankfully I've worked for some really great companies, and the opposite is true. But I think through my mentors, every single day and every time we connect, we're hearing about some form of harassment. And often people don't know that they're actually being harassed or they're being bullied. You may just see it as, oh, my boss doesn't like me, or there's a shift in tone in the room suddenly, or I'm now excluded from meetings. It's often very subtle in terms of the way that these perpetrators choose to misuse their power. And I think that's quite scary. And that's really what I want to raise my voice about in 2026, and lend my platform to those who may be, experiencing this kind of, I want to say, humiliation or punishment, because that's the truth of the matter. It often doesn't follow anything based on merit. Often a person speaks up. It can be ethical. It can be about their manager that isn't doing the right thing. And you start to see a trail or pattern being built thereafter, where this person is slowly excluded and eventually bullied out of an organization.
Sure. Now, what do you think women specifically don't? In fact, let's start by asking, what are women facing the most within different industries, just the women?
Well, since my platform, Boss Babes of South Africa, has a following now of, I want to say, over 100,000 across LinkedIn and Instagram, the feedback that we get every single day, and I've got 3 social media managers that, are looking after that, seem to be following a very scary trend in South Africa. And I don't know if it's because, the unemployment rate is so high. It probably is that people are finding themselves in what we call toxic work environments. And a toxic work environment is where, you're just fearful to speak up about anything. So you just accept it and you bide your time, and it's not a healthy and a productive space for you to be lending your skills and knowledge. That's number one. And then I think number 2 is coming into a workplace and being this progressive leader that we always advocate for women to be. And suddenly you find yourself, within a particular structure where, there's a male leader in a more senior position and doesn't expect this. He doesn't expect to see a woman coming into a workplace rather, owning their power, speaking up, bringing thought leadership, bringing, risk governance, compliance insights. And that is almost deemed as a threat sometimes. And that's often where you see the retaliation starting to happen, because this particular manager is not familiar with having women have a seat at the table, have a voice. They're very much stuck in what I call a 1950s mindset, where women must be owned and women must be submissive to men within a workplace. And I think that is just very, very sad in 2026.
Now, you also speak of retaliation.
Yes.
If women happen to report anything, what would that look like in a workplace?
Yeah, I think we're living in a largely digital world now, so we often send emails, we're sitting on Teams calls. I think everyone's very familiar with that. So it becomes easier, I want to say, for someone to start to perpetrate things on you, because as opposed to having a face-to-face conversation where you can read body language, or you can pick up tone, you can pick up what someone's body is saying. I think at the same time, when you start to then receive emails thereafter, it's very wise at that point that you start to receive an email that makes no sense, or seems like something has changed, that you start to have initial discussions with the particular person, just to iron out if there's anything that you missed. And you need to come across as someone that really wants to support a way forward in terms of thinking, in terms of you lending your skills appropriately, and also setting boundaries, I think, is very important. And unfortunately, my biggest advice to everyone is, sometimes the situation gets resolved, and that's where companies have a good and a healthy workplace and a strong culture. But 90% of the time, unfortunately, that's just the start of retaliation, which a lot of women unfortunately don't pick up, because they just think, oh, my manager's having a bad day. I'm not sure in which world we were led to believe that a bad day can lead you to, actually abuse people, but they shouldn't be that. Communication should always be opened. And if there's a genuine problem, you should be getting it directly from your manager, not from any other source.
I want to, from experience, obviously, just
yes.
And I know that this will probably help a whole lot of listeners.
Right.
Because we want to speak reality, right?
Yes.
In many workplaces, found that there's a lot of superiors that find using foul language normal, swearing basically, and the response that you always get is, "I'm not swearing at you. It's the situation that's making you feel that." Do you feel like that's something that people should actually let slide, or is that something that could be taken up with HR and so forth?
Yeah, before we go into HR, I think any kind of profanity should not be acceptable within professional workplaces. You are not at home, you're not sitting in your lounge, you're not sitting opposite your wife, for example. So please don't bring those, I want to say, those learned behaviors into the workspace and make people who are true professionals start to feel uncomfortable. The other thing I just want to caution people about, and I've been doing this a lot because I've had to learn this the hard way. I think it's very important to just understand that HR is hired by the company and their role is to protect the company from risk. And the more that people start to understand that process, you may understand why sometimes when you raise complaints, it's ignored or it's not important. Even raising a harassment claim, for months it can go unanswered or not responded to. And I mean, you go back to the definition, you understand that their role is not there to protect you. Their role is not there to be on the employee's side. Often their role seems to be, protecting a senior leader that you speak up about, and almost, I want to say, enabling his behavior. It's quite sad that women in today's world tend to enable certain behaviors in terms of corporate GBV, where they protect the perpetrator. You often get comments to say, but it's the first time I've heard of that, coming through. Often it isn't the first time because, past behavior predicts future behavior. But you notice that their role is very calm, and often your kind of, experience or trauma that you've experienced isn't well received, if I could say that. So my advice is always to consult a labor lawyer when you feel that things are, there's almost like an energy shift. And we all can pick this up. As human beings, we all have the natural ability to follow our intuition. We just sometimes don't because we think we're being paranoid or just anxious for no reason. And my advice is to consult with a labor lawyer. And if you're part of a union, also consult with your union rep. And get the right type of support, because you never want to be in a situation where you're going out to HR and you're crying your heart out, which many of us do, thinking that they're going to solve our problem. The truth is, from a risk perspective, if I had to wear their hat, I'd want to try and hear as much as I can and then manage the risk internally. So that's just from a risk perspective, wearing both hats, is to make sure that you have independent people guiding you in line with labor laws, and doing the research yourself. Research yourself, what is the definition of harassment? It will come up very quickly on ChatGPT or even a Google search, and start to monitor behaviors that you start to find that are misaligned to what you thought your job was going to be around, or even this change in tone that I speak about. And I think don't leave it too late is the last piece of advice as well. Take that action sooner rather than later. Go consult your labor lawyer. They will be able to review your trail of evidence, which is very important that you keep, and make sure that you're sort of, being able to position yourself going forward in a way that shows that you are knowledgeable about a particular situation. You are not left in the dark and now being guided just by HR. That's never served anyone that I've mentored, to be honest.
Sure. All right. In closure, what would you like? What advice can you give people that are, working and maybe they experience that? I know you speak about getting a lawyer, accounts and so forth, but just for someone who feels that they're not even sure if they actually getting abused, if they getting bullied. I remember there's a time where there was someone that I worked with. She was basically thanked by a gentleman that we worked with, and it was taken so light. People that have been through things like that, what should we think?
I think for me, always trust your gut, number one. You are not being paranoid, you are not being anxious. And always start with the definition of what is workplace harassment. It's defined clearly in South African law. I'm not going to try and repeat it, but it is a repetitive set of behaviors that are aimed to, demean you, to belittle you, and to, take away your dignity at a very high level. And that could find itself through various forms in an organization. So it's very important that every email you get, you are, reading through it, you are responding accordingly. And also don't be afraid in the earlier days to start setting up those one-on-one meetings to actually ask the particular person, what I noticed that there's a shift. I don't know if I'm just imagining it, but have my expectations changed? Why am I no longer being invited to meetings? It's good to have this on record. And I think the last thing is just to understand that as much as we're living in a world of technology, we're also living in a world where your recorded evidence under the RICA Act with someone that is part of a conversation with you is accepted. So please take your phones into every conversation that you're going to that you're feeling like, this may not go well. And you don't need anyone's consent to say, now we're recording this. Record it silently. If anything, you've got your own, set of evidence. Because my advice to women is often that after you have these difficult conversations or these so-called difficult conversations, you are thereafter gaslit, right? Someone comes to you and say, no, but that's not what I meant. I did not say that. You will get people saying, I did not say that. And it's good just to, to maintain your own sanity and your own peace through the processes, that you keep everything on record. And, your labor lawyer will be able to listen to at least one of those and say, this is what this person is actually intending to do. So I think it's very important and strategic for women to find themselves empowered within spaces that may not be very empowering at this point.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, ma'am, for talking to us. I think we really appreciate having such conversations that are realistic to things that we are experiencing on a daily basis. Well done to you for coming up with such an initiative that deals with women more specifically, because we actually go through the most. So
Correct.
We really appreciate you.
Correct. We are all going through something that is very, I guess, hurtful in some way or form, and it's important to just bear this in mind as leaders as well, to be kind to everyone that works with us. There's no need to be nasty and cruel and push people off the edge, as we call it. Try and be kind, try and be ethical. Like, those are not things that you can ever learn in any school.
Thank you so much. We appreciate you.
Thank you, Faith. Thank you so much. It's been an honor to share my journey and share my voice of advocacy going forward for the rest of 2026 as well.
Good day ahead, ma'am.